brief video should help you with your third assignment, which is outlining the selection screening processes for your potential candidates and developing an application form. You are required for this assignment to create a hard copy of a volunteer application form. Many of you may have websites and software that allows you to take online applications. However, as part of the accessibility legislation, you are required to be able to offer your application in various formats. So organizations should all have a simple hard copy available of your application form. This assignment is two specific sections, so you will be submitting two different files. In the first part of your assignment, you will be creating a list of all the steps that a potential applicant or candidate will have to carry out in order to be placed in your organization. So think about what you've got in your position description and all of some of the screening criteria. So does this individual need to fill out an application form? Do they need to attend an interview? Will you be screening them for reference checks, police records checks? Are there different screening criteria such as proof of valid driver's licenses? Do they have to sign different waivers? Is the orientation and training mandatory? So think about all of the steps that an individual will need to complete before they can actually actively carry out their volunteer position. One thing I'll remind you again is you're looking at your volunteer position description. You may find holes or gaps. You do need to go back and edit your volunteer position description if you realized you have missed some of these points. Also, please keep in mind this must use plain language techniques. So, part B is your actual volunteer application form. One of the things that we're looking for is that you have used some of the techniques from the actual modules. And the most important thing that we are looking for in your application form is that you have included a notice of collection. You will need to go back and access Module B1 to get a sample of what a notice of collection is and how to write one. You will also need to confirm if your organization collects information under certain privacy legislation. For example, a municipality, you're covered by the Municipal Act. Long-term care facilities are covered by the Long-Term Care Act. Child care facilities are covered by the Child Care Act. So think about, are you collecting information under a specific act? If you're not sure, that is okay, but you still need to indicate that you are collecting the information in accordance with privacy legislation. And if you have access to someone that you can check out how you are allowed to collect information, to go ahead and check with them. If you're not sure, just put PIPEDA or privacy legislation. Also, some of you may wish to include reference releases, confidentiality forms, different liability waivers, emergency contact photographic waivers. You are welcome to include them in your application form. They are not necessary, but if you actually are going to be collecting or having volunteers sign these forms, this is a great opportunity to create them. So back to part 1 of your assignment, where you need to indicate all the steps an individual will be taking to actively carry out their volunteer position once they have gone through all the hoops. So in this particular example, it is for a facilitator assistant in the English conversation group. It is a low risk position, and we've used this in previous examples. And because it is a low-risk position, they do not need to have such an intense and in-depth screening process. And it's nice that they have indicated why they are not going through very detailed screening processes and steps. However, but they do recognize the importance of the screening and selection steps and how it helps them assess and make an appropriate fit with the volunteer and the organization. So the first thing the person has to do is complete an application form. They can do it online or at the community center. Along with the application form, they will have to fill out some information for references, or if they need to gather information about the suitability of themselves for this particular position. The next step in the screening and selection process is after their application's been reviewed by the volunteer manager is going to arrange a face-to-face interview. Given COVID, this may change now. You may be doing a Zoom interview. The important thing is you will be actually conducting an interview. The volunteer at that time during the interview will be asked to provide references, and they will have to have brought with them their reference release sheet. So once the volunteer managers conducted the reference checks, the applicant will be contacted. They will be officially recognized and accepted into the program. Then they will come in for a mini orientation and an opportunity to meet with the facilitator they will be working with and talk about the program in more detail. After that, then they are going to introduce the confidentiality forms and the liability waiver. Something to keep in mind, if you are having confidentiality waivers, photographic waivers, liability waivers, they are legal documents and the individual needs to understand what they are signing. And after that, they have a group and formal orientation. This particular example is for it's for a fairly high risk position. It is an individual who is assisting with vulnerable clients, new Canadians, completing their income tax forms each year. So the title is odd. It's called Community Volunteer, but that is actually what the government insists this position is called, Community Volunteer, although it doesn't help describe the position. So for this particular position, the individual will need to submit a completed application form. They are required to sign the promise of confidentiality and the liability waivers up front before they come in for an interview. In this particular instance, what they have done is they have provided all of the information up front so that the volunteer knows exactly what is involved with the position and the screening and selection process, and that they can screen themselves out if they do not want to fill out the actual paperwork, or that they are prepared and they can ask questions about the waivers when they come in. Then the individual comes in for an interview. They have already provided the reference checks up front as part of their application package. I'll be showing you the application package in a minute. They have 3 reference checks, and it indicates who can provide those references, an employer or character references. They note that family and friends cannot provide a reference. Once they have completed all those steps and they've been officially accepted into the program, they have to attend a 2-hour mandatory in-person training and orientation session. And it includes all about the Accessibility Act, the Revenue Canada tax updates, and other information that is required by the Human Resources Department. They also have a second part to their screening and selection process, which is all of the application forms. So what they have done is they've created a booklet, and there is a sample of that in the module itself. When you actually open the application module, there is samples of how these applications are developed in booklet forms, and this is great if you have an organization that requires a lot of papers that need to be signed. If you print it double-sided on ledger paper, the application is actually one large piece of paper, and all of the information, all of the forms are all on one piece, so that Staff don't have to go hunting for all of the different various pieces of forms or waivers, or they aren't sure what has to be completed. It is one single page, large page that's been printed on. So the front of the application, it's for adults. You'll notice it's for 18 and older. We're not asking or collecting any kind of demographics or salutations. It indicates where the sites are that the individual would like to volunteer so that they can pick and choose where they would be working, and also about how they would like to volunteer. This position is seasonal or year round. So volunteers can indicate that up front, and also they can pick and choose when they're available, daily, weekly, monthly. This helps the volunteer manager pick and choose the appropriate individuals depending on the time of year for this particular position. They're looking at why they're interested in volunteering with the tax clinic. Um, try to keep it more appropriate for your position or program, to identify any skills or experiences with the tax filing software, any relevant work or volunteer experience, and how did they find out about the program. On the other side of their application form or booklet is the reference release. You'll notice this is all kind of in legalese here about getting permission, the individual's name, and they provide the information about who they will be collecting the references from, and there is a signature and sign off. Reference releases are legal documents, and you do need permission to actually carry out reference checks. They do have an emergency contact section in here where they can put information about who to contact in the event of an emergency, and also if they wish to choose and identify any potential serious health concerns that they want the organization to be aware of. Usually, we find we have this filled out occasionally, but it's something for us to know if we have to deal with an emergency. They've included the promise of confidentiality waiver. You'll notice here that there is a notice of collection, that why they're collecting the information under what act, so the Municipal Act, or it could be in accordance with privacy legislation or PIPEDA, and you indicate what this information is going to be used for. So volunteer records, for making placements, and for contact list for a newsletter, and you also indicate who they can contact if they have more questions about how this information is going to be collected. And finally, they have the legal liability waiver that the person signs. And you'll notice it does affect legal rights. These are legal documents. It has the person, it has their name, the name of the program, when they are going to be starting, and it explains what the actual legal liability waiver is about. We will be covering this in detail, how liability waivers work, in the actual module. You'll notice on here there is a bit of a head up here about signing the form, that they understand. They've read this and they actually understand what it is that they are signing, and then they sign off. If you are going to be including confidentiality waivers, photographic waivers, liability waivers, we have provided samples that you can use, and could be edited only in that you're changing the name of the organization. The samples that we have provided have already been vetted by our human resources, by risk management, and by legal departments. So if you are going to use them, it's always a good idea to make sure that they have met those criteria, and even that you have run this by your board, your human resource department, your legal contact if you are going to start using liability waivers. Please, whatever you do, do not go on the internet and find examples of liability waivers. you have no idea where they have come from, if they have been vetted, if they are appropriate, and you actually could end up in with more trouble or in legal situations if it isn't an appropriate type of liability waiver that you're using. Also, if you find you're looking at these particular samples we've given you, please do not go changing all of the wording. Again, these are legal documents that have been vetted, so really it's only the name of the organization that gets changed in a liability waiver. So it would be, instead of the Regional Municipality of Waterloo, you would insert your organization's name, and wherever you see the word region, regional, that is where you change it to your organization's name. You don't want to go changing this around. You'll also might notice that this may not appear to use plain language techniques. Believe it or not, these documents and the waivers that we have shown you in these examples are about as basic that we can get for plain language techniques, while at the same time maintaining that they are legal documents to be signed. So this is why we emphasize that if you give the people the waivers up in front, they can read them, that when they come in and they sign them, that you actually explain what it is the individual is signing, so that the person is very clear about what it is they're signing and they understand it. So you, again, can't go changing to plain language techniques, and we will cover a lot more about this in the module.